Hey weirdos, welcome back. If you're new to my channel, thanks for stopping by. I am the Bone Knacker. I broke my foot. My horse broke my foot when he stepped on it. Today we are going to be staying close to home in my home state of Maine, and we're going to journey off to a little town called Newport, where we talk about the lives, lies, and many wives of Maine's first serial killer, James Rodney Hicks. In complete amateur style, I will be releasing this in 2 videos because I record these on my phone and I have very limited memory. So the first video is going to be the crimes and the second video is going to be the confessions. It's October 16th, 1982, and Jerry Lynn, who I'm just going to call Jerry from here on out, her children and her parents were out spending an evening together bowling. Jerry and her family were very, very close. They shared a duplex. Jerry and her kids lived on one side and her parents lived on the other. They did a lot of activities together. You know, this was a fairly normal occurrence. But as evening turned into late evening, it was time to call it a night. So the family packed up, left the bowling alley, and began their ride home. However, Jerry, who had just been dumped by her boyfriend and still had the note in her pocket, the loser couldn't even do it face to face, he wrote her a note, was not quite ready to call it an evening yet. So she asked her father to drop her off at the Gateway Lounge. Now the Gateway Lounge was very, very close to their house, about 5 minutes away. She went there a lot, not because she was like a drunk or an alcoholic or anything, because it's Newport, Maine, and there's nothing to do. During the day, it was like a pub. You could stop in, you could get a burger, you could get fries, you could get a cold brewski. And at night, it was, you know, more of an adult thing. There was some drinking and music. Not really seeing the problem in it. Jerry's dad dropped her off, said, hey, you know, if you need a ride, go ahead and give me a call. Waved goodbye and headed home with his wife and the kids, and Jerry Lynn walked into the bar. She wasn't there for very long before a dark-haired, dark-eyed stranger walked into the door, and he immediately noticed Jerry, walked over to her and introduced himself, and that is how their evening together began. Throughout the night, it was said that the two could be seen drinking, laughing, dancing, drinking, eating, drinking, lots of drinking, and all of it on the dime of this newly arrived stranger. But you know, as the old story goes, night turned into late night, turned into early morning, and now it's time for the bar to close, so everybody has to leave. Meanwhile, back at home, Jerry's dad, who had stayed up in case Jerry needed a ride, saw headlights approaching the driveway. Feeling pretty grateful he was spared a night out on a cold October morning, he was fairly confident that that was Jerry, so he went to sleep. Except that wasn't Jerry, and Jerry didn't actually come home that night or any night after.
But around 1 a.m., it sounds like Jerry makes it home.
My stepfather and my mother, they lived in that duplex with Jerry and 3 kids. And a car pulled in the driveway, shut the light and the engines off for a long time. Long enough that my stepfather believed that Jerry had gotten a ride home. He wouldn't have to go to the Gateway and get her. So he went to bed. And the next day, got a call from my mother. Jerry didn't come home last night, kind of worried about her. I said, geez.
The next morning, the 17th now, it was immediately noticed that Jerry wasn't home. She wasn't at her house, the duplex next door, and she was not at her parents' house, and the children were still at the parents' house. So feeling a little bit like something was off, Jerry's mom, June, picked up the phone and called her son, Jerry's brother, Vance. At which point she was told that no, Vance hadn't seen her, like, you know, basically within the last 24 hours. It was at this point now where June's starting to feel a little panicky and called the Newport police. The police told her not to worry, give it a little more time, and she would probably show up at some point maybe, and just basically didn't take it seriously and said, if she's still gone tomorrow, give us a call back. So the family does that. They wait a whole entire day, and now it's the 18th, and they call again. They call Newport Police. They try to officially report Jerry missing, at which point Officer Riker comes over to their house and takes a statement. It's here that he learned that while it might not necessarily be so uncommon for Jerry to go out, but it was uncommon for her to not come back and to not be in contact with anyone. As we mentioned earlier, Jerry and her family were very, very close. She was a very good mother, and she always was good at keeping people in the loop.
The thing that was really out of character with her not coming home was that she didn't call Mom. That was the only thing that got people really worried. No matter where she was, she always did that.
If she was going to go somewhere, there was a plan. People knew. She made sure her children were taken care of. It wasn't her absence that was necessarily alarming. It was her silence. Jerry's silence, her complete lack of communication, was deafening. So Riker goes to their house. He talks to the parents. He learns all this info, learns that she was at the gateway, the night before, collects all that information and leaves to begin the search. After he left, the parents actually wrote an ad out to the local newspaper requesting for information. If anyone was at the bar that night, left a description of their daughter. If anyone seen her or knew her whereabouts, please contact us. And to their surprise, they actually got a reply to that ad. A man named Nathan Small replied saying that he had an ability to find missing people and that their daughter was floating down in the Bingham River in Somerset County. The river was searched, nothing was found. Sometime a little later, after October 20th, it was either Officer Riker or Corporal Eugene Robinson. It's not always specific with who did what interview or who dug up what information, but those are the two main cops that are involved. During all this time, Corporal Eugene does join the search and gets a message on his answering machine stating that someone had seen Jerry at the bar with a man named Gary Hicks. So taking this information, they go to the bar and start talking to the people there, talking to the patrons, talking to the bartender. The bartender had really good information. Unfortunately, she was terrible with names, but she assured them that if the man came back in, she would recognize him. So the name that they were left with was Gary Hicks. And while the name Gary wasn't super familiar, Hicks was. Specifically a man named James Hicks. So on a leap, they go to his house. They're like, hey, blah, 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 Jerry Lynch, he's missing. Do you know anything? And it's here that I get like some sort of conflicting information. Some of my resources say that he denied being there altogether, and some of them say that he admits that he was there, but he didn't know Jerry and didn't know anything about the case. So I'm gonna go with he admits to being there, but didn't know Jerry. So they're at his house, they're talking to him. He's like, yep, I was there. I don't know what you're talking about. So obviously with no really substantial evidence or anything like that, they just, write down the information that they think is important and head out. Not more than a week later, and true to her word, the bartender calls back and says, hey, this guy's here right now. The bartender had clocked in for work, gone behind the desk, and the guy walked in wearing the same outfit and sat in the same seat. So she immediately gets on the horn, and at this point, the man is identified, confirmed to be James Hicks, not Gary Hicks. So back to James's house they go, because now they have a positive ID from a reliable eyewitness. But obviously they're still, looking into leads, talking around town, trying to figure out where Jerry went, one of the officers actually talked to a longtime postal employee, and it was here that he learned that this wasn't the first time that James's name had been whispered around the disappearance of a woman. It seems that about 7 years ago, in I think 77, he had a wife named Jenny, and she mysteriously went missing. And James started blabbing all over town that she fell in love with a long haul trucker and left the family and went to Florida. And it was, everyone believed him, and it was kind of dropped. It was just kind of assumed or accepted that she ran off with another man.
Said Jenny used to hang out with truck drivers a lot, and she wanted to break off the relationship. He made her out to be, some lady of the evening that chased truckers up and down the interstate.
So now, armed with the positive ID from the bartender and this bit of information from the postal employee, they go back to James's house, interview him again to maybe try to get some answers. But answers they did not get. Instead, they were met with some fucking bizarre behavior. James was rude, he was belligerent, he was ignorant. At one point it was said that he went like he was gonna take a drink of water, but kept going up with the glass and just poured it all over himself. Whenever the officers tried to talk to him about Jenny, they brought up Jenny, he would get really angry and start accusing the officers of accusing him. During the second interview, his current live-in girlfriend at the time, Linda, did come home, demanded that the officers leave, and called a lawyer. So at that point, the officers were forced to leave. But it was here that James went from a possible witness to suspect number one. After Riker and Richardson leave James's house, they call Detective Dick Reichel at the Maine State Police, and they say, hey, we are not really finding anything solid about Jerry, but we did find out about this other woman named Jenny, and we might possibly have like some sort of double missing person, double homicide thing on our hands. Remembering the conversation that he had with the postal worker, he remembered that the postal worker said that Jenny's last name was Sear, her maiden name was Sear. So he opened the phone book and started going down all the Sears that he could find until he found her mother. And after talking to his mom very briefly over the phone, they made arrangements and he went to their house so they could speak. And what he heard dropped his jaw. James and Jenny met in 1969 on the school bus on their way to school in Carmel, Maine. It was no sooner that they locked eyes that they, I guess, fell in love. And within a year, they were married. James moved in very much against the will. He moved into Jenny's house with her and her parents, and she was pregnant. So within a year, they had met, got married, she got pregnant, and had dropped out of school. Gotta remember that James moved into Jenny's house against her parents' will. This is a minor boy moving into somebody else's house after they voiced their dislike for it. That is the entitlement that this shit sack had. But at the same time, being a parent myself, I can only imagine the internal conflict that her parents had. Not only is she with a guy that they don't like, but she's married to him and pregnant. So at least for now, it's like a permanent thing. You can either let your kid run off with this guy that you don't like or trust, or you can let him bully his way into your house. If it was me, I'd let him bully his way into my house so I could keep eyes on my kid. I don't know, and then maybe one night I might be in the kitchen cooking for everybody, and maybe he might run into my butcher knife 9 or 25 times. Hypothetically. So in 71, their first child, a daughter, Veronica, was born, and it was kind of known around town that their relationship was pretty rocky for a lot of reasons. They were really young to get married. They had a child when they couldn't even really take care of themselves. Remember, they're living with Jenny's parents. And there was a huge problem with James's infidelity. He was known to kind of roam around town. Obviously, Jenny, who was home with the kid, didn't like this. But she also didn't kind of really know any better. She had no basis of comparison as far as how relationships go. She went from her dad, not that she was in a relationship with her dad, but you know, she's at home, her male role model's her father. She went from her father straight to her husband. And not only did she go right from one to the other, but he moved in with them. That's her safe spot. Where was she gonna go? She couldn't leave him because he was there. She was trapped. Remember that. But she decided to stick with it for like 3 more years. And during this time, they filed for divorce multiple times. But eventually in 74, again, after filing for divorce, the process was stopped because she found out she was pregnant again with their second child. And in October of 74, she gave birth to a son that they named Seth. Between 1974 and 1977, on the outside, life for the Hickses seemed to get a little bit better. James, at some insane age of like almost 20, finally graduated high school. They moved out of Jenny's parents' house into a trailer park, I think in Etna. James got a job doing like construction work up and down I-95, and Jenny actually was able to get a job. She worked at a nursing home. They were actually doing well enough that they were able to hire a full-time nanny to come live with them. And so they did, and her name was Susan Matley, and she was 15 years old. I want to know where Susan's mother is, because what mother would send her child off to live with strangers at the very young age of 15 years old? Like, yeah, I don't know you. Here's my child. Have a good time. So what happened to Jenny? Well, this is what her mother says. According to her mother, Jenny had gone out for the day to visit her sister and brought the children with her. They went to visit her and to do some shopping and whatnot. The oldest daughter, Veronica, voiced that she wanted to spend the night with her sister. So Jenny agreed that she could stay on the condition that she was to still keep her appointment the next morning. Veronica had a dentist appointment, and Jenny wanted her to keep that appointment. So it was agreed that yes, she could spend the night, but she would be returning the next day to come get her and to bring her to that appointment. Jenny and her son head home. Veronica stays there. Now, according to Jenny's mom, when Jenny got back home, the babysitter was out for the evening, so it was just Jenny and James, and everything was fine. At one point, the babysitter did come home. James says that the babysitter, Susan, and Jenny had a conversation, and eventually Jenny went into bed with the baby, to go to bed for the night. James followed a few hours later, and when he got up the next morning to go to work, Jenny and Seth were still in bed, and when he came home, she was just gone. They spent a little bit of time looking for her, not a ton of time. I don't think a police report was even officially filed. I don't think she was ever on the books officially reported missing. After a day or two, James just started saying that Jenny had been in a relationship with this trucker, and that she must have just left and gone to Florida with him. Now, there was some weirdness around Jenny's disappearance. It was noted that while she was gone, her wallet and her purse and her glasses and everything like that were left there.
You deserve a second look. You've got it at the optical department at Sears. Buy the first pair of fashion frames that are regular low price. Get 25% off a second pair. Get fashion frames that will kill them in the evening or shake them up on the job. Get a pair for that outdoorsy look and one for that cozy nook. Buy any frame at our regular low price. Get 25% off a second frame. You deserve a second look.
The optical department at Sears.
And back then in the 70s, it wasn't easy to replace glasses like it is today. You couldn't, call in your lenses in an hour or scoot to a dollar store and get like a pair of readers or whatever. Like, it was a process and a hassle to get them. So leaving your glasses behind was really not an option. So that was immediate red flags. While everyone was out looking for Jenny, at one point, James goes back to the house, calls her sister Denise and says, well, now her stuff is gone, so she must have come back to get it. And that's when the trucker rumors started. Jenny's mom ended the interview by saying that yes, Jenny was unhappy, and yes, there was some talk of getting a divorce. She wanted to leave, but they had started this divorce process like 5 times at this point. So was it, nobody knew if there was even going to be any follow through. But it was known that in general, yes, she was unhappy. Jenny's mom is adamant that there is no way in hell that she would have left the kids there with him. And she is positive that James has done something with her daughter, but no one will believe her. After they finished talking to Jenny's mom, the officers thought that it would probably be a good idea to go back to where James and Jenny lived together, where Jenny disappeared from, and try to talk to some people there who might remember what happened. Earlier, I misspoke and said that they moved out to Etna, Maine, but it was actually in Carmel, Maine. They moved into a trailer park, the T&N trailer park in Carmel, Maine. So the officers go there in hopes to find somebody who remembers anything from that night. And as luck would have it, James and Jenny's neighbor, Trudy, was still living there in the same trailer directly next door to the one that James and Jenny had shared together. And if you thought what Jenny's mom had to say was crazy, it was nothing compared to what Trudy was about to say. Buckle up, because shit's getting crazy. Trudy vividly recalls the night that Jenny went missing. She says that she could hear an argument, screaming. She could hear a voice saying, "Jimmy, stop it, please," or "Jimmy, you're killing me." She couldn't really tell which one it was, but it was definitely a woman screaming for Jimmy to stop doing whatever Jimmy's doing. You could hear Seth crying, and after a bit, it was like all the commotion stopped. It was silent, but there was a single light on. And after a substantial amount of time passed, Trudy heard what she could only describe as chopping and sawing. And after that went on for quite a while, she's pretty sure that she heard James's truck start up and drive off. Next morning, Jenny was gone. When the officers asked her why she never reported this to the police officers back then in the 70s, what Trudy had to say, it was really upsetting. Trudy never said anything because after Jenny disappeared, James made it a point to always be around her. So when Trudy was questioned, James was actually right there. She couldn't say anything. She was scared. He kind of knew, or had a gut feeling, what he had just done to his wife. She kept her mouth shut. While they were talking to Trudy, Trudy also brought up the nanny Susan, and how after like a couple months after Jenny went missing, maybe a month or 2, she just kind of abruptly disappeared as well. And she also thought that that was strange. They're investigating, they're looking, they're following leads. And in March 22nd, 1983, Detective Rachel learns that Susan is now living in Massachusetts, gets a hold of her, and drives down to see her. And this is your trigger warning. You have to remember, when this stuff happened in the 70s, Susan was a minor. So this is your trigger warning right now. There's some kid diddling and some violence. So this is your warning. This is what Susan had to say. On the 16th, Susan, who's the nanny, the caretaker of the children, was in the kitchen cooking dinner for the kids. And James, cigarette in his mouth, comes up behind her as she's cooking and pulls her to him and presses himself up against her. I don't know how else to say that. sort of tastefully. You got to remember that at the time, Susan's only 15 and maybe kind of naive to some things, so she didn't quite realize what was going on at first. After only a few seconds, when she realized what was going on, she began to protest and to fight back. James, realizing that this was not going to go down the way he had hoped it was going to go down, took the cigarette out of his mouth and plunged it into Susan's chest until he could smell her flesh burning, leaving a massive wound on her chest. I don't know why she didn't throw whatever she was cooking in his face. I don't know why she didn't immediately stab him. I have 110 questions. Why did she stay? But that confrontation ended, and then the next day she talked to Jenny, told her what happened. Now remember, Jenny was already pretty fed up with James because of his infidelity. So now not only had he tried to cheat on her again, but with a minor, with a child. That's disgusting. I did not see or read anything at all that mentioned anything happening to James about assaulting Susan. There was no cops were called, no files were charged. She just totally assaulted and burned the shit out of this minor child and 100% got away with it. Jenny had had enough. So the two of them, Jenny and Susan, kind of like hatched a plan. It wasn't like, ooh, like a diabolical plan. It was just that for the next day on the 16th, if Susan could find a place to be for the evening, Jenny was going to talk to James about this incident and finally tell him that she wants to take the children and leave. Specifically not with a trucker. So the next day rolls around and they put the plan into action. Susan finds some place to go and Jenny confronts, allegedly, as far as Susan's concerned, Jenny confronts James about what happened. At some point in the evening, some of my sources say around 11, some of them say around 4 a.m., but at some point, Susan came home to a really, really bizarre scene. She describes James awake, staring at a static-filled TV screen, and Jenny laying rather unnaturally on the couch. Susan said that Jenny basically looked like she was just kind of like tossed onto the couch, like she didn't put herself there. She wasn't in like a very natural position. Her head was on the wooden arm of the chair. One arm was kind of under her like this, and the other one was up over her head. She said that only half of her was on the couch, so I interpreted that as meaning her legs were off of the couch. Jenny's hair was kind of oddly swept over her face, so it covered all of her facial features, and that, in Susan's words, she looked dead. After stepping into that situation and, kind of taking it in and looking around after a couple minutes, James insists that Jenny is sleeping and that Susan should go do the same. You have to remember that the night before, Susan was just assaulted by this guy, and then knowing what they were talking about while she was gone, and then coming home to this, and then being told to go to bed, she was pretty uneasy. Susan listened to James and went to her room, but she did not go to sleep. Instead, she worried and thought and listened. And what she heard was incredibly disturbing. She said that she heard what she describes as somebody walking and the sound of something dragging. It sounded like somebody was dragging something across the floor. She said that she heard the trailer door open and close like somebody left. And then after an amount of time, she also said that she heard the truck start and leave. She also told the cops that after Jenny went missing, she had not been allowed to leave the house. After Jenny had gone missing, James was essentially holding Susan hostage, not letting her leave. And the first time the cops were there in the 70s is when she made a break for it and just kind of left. She basically escaped and ran away. If we want to do a little recap, which I always recommend because it's always super fun counting red flags, we've got James meeting Jenny, knocking her up, making her drop out of school, and moving into her parents' house against their will. The dude moved into someone's house against their will. That's ballsy. And then he tries to sexually assault a minor. When she fights back, he physically assaults her and then holds her hostage. I'm assuming so she can't tell anybody. To also prevent people from talking, he's putting himself around the people that are being questioned, like what we mentioned with Trudy. Whenever Trudy was being questioned, James was always around, so she can't say anything. So what have we learned? We've learned that James likes to be in control. So after hearing the statements from Trudy and Susan, it was actually enough circumstantial evidence to arrest James. In October of 1983, it's 1983 now, so it's like a year after Jerry's gone missing, a grand jury actually indicted and charged Hicks with the murder of Jenny, even though there was no weapon, there was no evidence, there was no body, there was no proof that she was dead, because remember, he had started that rumor that she ran off with a trucker. He was arrested for the murder of Jenny. Of course, James denies everything, and he goes before a jury in Bangor, and he's like, I didn't do this, you guys, there's no body, there's no evidence, she ran off with a trucker, she was a whore, you know, blah, blah, blah. In March of 1984 now, they finally go to trial, and Trudy speaks, and Susan speaks, and she tells the jury and the judge about what happened, tells them about his assault on her. You know, she's got a huge scar on her chest from the cigarette burn. She talks about the weird circumstances when she came home, how bizarre Jenny looked, the stuff she heard when she went to sleep, and how she was just kind of gone the next morning. After 9 hours of deliberation, even though there wasn't a body, they found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, leaving his then longtime girlfriend Linda to take care of Veronica and Seth. He wasn't charged with murder, he was charged with manslaughter in the 4th degree. It's a pretty bullshit charge. Basically what manslaughter in the 4th degree is, yeah, I killed it, but you provoked it. I killed you because you made me kill you. In a not self-defense way. Now James is in prison, and you would think things would quiet down, but they don't. He's in prison, he needs to make a scene. I don't know if you remember Mr. Pont from the New Bedford murders, but these guys have a lot of similarities. They put themselves in the limelight constantly and needlessly. It's like they just constantly want all this attention. James's new thing was that now that he's in prison, he needs to marry his girlfriend Linda, because Linda is not the biological mother of these children, and because they don't have the same last name, because they're not married, she's having a hard time taking care of them. So them getting married would give her the same last name of the children, and it would make her job easier. I actually have some input about this. I have 2 children, and I do not have the same last name as them. It did create a problem, but only for pieces of shit who wanted to create a problem. It's mostly an issue when they were infants. It did cause a little bit of trouble. But there's a problem. James is married to Jenny. Now you gotta remember that James claims Jenny ran off with a guy. So legally, on paper, he's still married, and he needs to get divorced from her first somehow, without admitting that she's dead. So the court's like, yeah, you can marry Linda, but you need to sign this death certificate for your first wife first. That really angered James, and he wrote a letter to the newspaper, simply stating this, which was a pretty good idea. It was a pretty good loophole he did. Now, it was the state that found James guilty of murder. James didn't confess or admit to anything. He was convicted of murder despite the fact that he denied it. So James says, why do I need to sign your paper? You're the one saying that she's dead, not me. If you think she's dead, you should back up your actions and sign her death certificate. And if you don't really believe she's dead, then you need to let me go because you have me in prison for murder. And if you don't think she's dead, then I really can't be here, can I? Like, their hands were kind of tied, so James and Linda got married. An employee of the Bureau of Vital Records named Robert Packard had actually commented that he didn't even think a death certificate could be produced without a body. It was about 10 days after that comment that James and Linda did actually get married. They got married surrounded by cement and iron bars in the Thomaston State Prison up here in Maine. In 1990, after only serving 7 of his 10 years, he was released on good behavior, where he was reported as being an absolute model inmate. So James gets released and the couple goes back up to Etna, Maine and tries to start to put the pieces of their life together. People still remember who he is, what he did, and Jerry Lynn still hasn't been found. So needless to say, he was not very well received, but over the next several months, they did begin to put the pieces of their life back together. James was getting to know his children again, who he had been apart from for 7 years. Eventually, James did find employment at the Twin City Motel. It hadn't even been a year before James was back to his regular tricks again. His brother Stephen introduced him to Stephen's wife's friend Karen, and Karen and James immediately started a relationship behind his wife's back. Eventually, James divorces Linda and gets together with Karen, and the two of them move in with her parents. Sound familiar? This seems to be like an ongoing thing with James. He thinks he's like King Turd of Shit Island, but he doesn't actually provide anything for any of his partners. He moves in with their parents. I don't understand what's so desirable about this guy. He has a lot of personalities as somebody with NPD, the narcissistic personality disorder. I'm not saying that he is. I'm not a doctor or anything. I'm crazy into the brain and how it functions in mental health. But generally, the red flags of that are people with grandiose opinions of themselves. They never really achieve much, but for some reason they still think they're better than everything and everyone in the room. Tend to have a sense of entitlement over people. And along with this sense of entitlement kind of comes the disregard for other people. Like, if I can throw you under the rug and it will help further myself, then I'll do that, and disregard what it may do to you. They can sometimes appear to have two personalities, like a super sweet, charming one, and then it's when the doors are closed, they're super manipulative and mean and controlling and hurtful. And this is largely because they like eyes on them, they like attention, they like to be seen as the good guy. When they're in public, they'll be overly sweet and overly kind because very important to them what other people think of them. Even though their reputation may not be as great as they think it is in their head, they do not want it tarnished. Now, James, freshly divorced, 36-year-old, convicted murderer, single father of 2, I think, now moves in with this new girl, Karen, after less than a year of even knowing each other. They eventually end up getting married, but during their marriage, they actually split up and divorced twice and get back together. When they would separate, James would be seeing this other woman named Louise. So he was kind of flip-flopping back and forth. Her name was Louise Robinson. James and Louise actually met at the Twin Motor Inn after he hired her. And she actually got pregnant by him sometime, I think, in early 1992. But he denied that it was his. But a paternity test would later prove that it was his. In 1994, thank God, Louise smartened up and just called the entire relationship off completely. And when she was later interviewed by law enforcement, she said that James had never said anything about Jenny, his other wife, or his other children. She didn't even know about Veronica and Seth. In the barely 4 years that James has been released, he's been divorced 3 times, married twice, and had another child. And as he was cycling through these women, the police were going around backtracking, talking to them all, seeing if they had any stories to share. While James was in jail, actually, I forgot to mention this, but while he was in jail, Jerry Lynn's brother Vance also got arrested, had a less than good track record. Actually arrested, I think, for beating the absolute crap out of someone in a parking lot. They were in prison together at the same time, and Vance asked James about his sister Jerry Lynn, and it was in prison that James said that she, again, because he's super creative, ran off with a trucker. So still in 1994, while all of this is going on, James is getting married and divorced and all that crap, he hires another woman to work with him, and her name is Lynn Willette. Immediately after hiring her, James begins to pursue a relationship. You have to remember that we've discussed that James kind of likes position of power, holds more authority than maybe he does, and he likes to be in control. She was actually hired as a maintenance mechanic. She had a career in the Army, and she was super talented and had a lot of trades and skills. You could imagine there was already probably an amount of, I don't want to say submission between them, but he was her boss and already in a place of intimidation. And he immediately tries to pursue a relationship with her. So I can imagine, being Lynn, the pressure that she might have if she tried to say no. Would she be fired? Would he just harass her at work instead? So for lack of phrasing, James wore her down, and she agreed to start dating him. On their third date, James drops a bombshell saying that this place that he's been living in for quite a long time, all of a sudden now he can't afford it and he's gonna be evicted, and he really needs to move in with her. James, being James, just kind of steamrolled her thoughts and her feelings and did it anyways against her will. Kind of like what he did to Jenny's parents. So staying true to James's MMO, he moves himself in to Lynn's apartment, taking over her safe place. So she's around him at home, she's around him at work, and at work, he's her boss. And so you gotta imagine he takes that title and attitude home with him now, because James likes control. After James moves in with Lynn, Vance, Jerry Lynn's brother, gets released from prison, and James begins to get very, very paranoid that Vance is following him and stalking him, and actually calls the police department to file a report against Vance and tries to get like a harassment order, like a cease and desist against him. All this really did was put eyes back on James and made it aware that he was with a new woman now. So the local cops actually passed the case on to the Maine detectives, and this is when Detective Zamboni gets involved. And this is 1996 now, and I think, yes, it's 1996 in February. And Detective Zamboni reaches out to James to see if he wants to come in and take a polygraph test, because they're still trying to find Jerry Lynn. So he wants to know if James wants to come in, take a polygraph test just to like clear his name. But James, pulling a very James move, he did come in, but he brought Lynn with him. And this is when for that moment, Zamboni's concerns turn from Jerry Lynn, who's still missing, to Lynn, who could potentially actively be in danger at this moment. So he mentions a polygraph test, but then starts shifting the conversation towards how he was in jail for the murder of Jenny, and this makes him look suspicious. Jerry Lynn is still missing. Mostly at this point, Zamboni's purpose, his main goal was to somehow make it very aware to Lynn that James is involved in all of this like missing women stuff. Lynn definitely picked up what Zamboni was putting down, and shortly after this interaction at the police station, she called her mom and began what I call the slow move out. She took small personal things like extra clothes and things like that James wouldn't really notice or miss, and began to slowly bring them to her mother's house under James's nose. On May 18th of 1996, she officially told James she was leaving. She was leaving him with the apartment, and she gathered the rest of the things that she couldn't really move without him noticing and brought them to her mom's, officially ending her relationship with James, ending her residency at the apartment, and she's now living with her mom, but I think she's still for now working at the hotel. Because of this, James knew her schedule. So when he wasn't working, he was constantly showing up at her house or constantly calling her. I mean, like calling her, hanging up, calling her again. He was known and said to be parked outside of her house at like 2 in the morning and 4 in the morning. He'd just be sitting there. He would follow her home, follow her wherever she was going. He was literally stalking her, which is rich coming from a guy who was complaining about how he thought someone else was stalking him. So he did this for weeks and weeks and weeks until one day, Lynn just didn't come home. Lynn's absence was immediately noticed the next day when she didn't show up to a family reunion event that she planned. So about halfway through the event, when she hadn't shown up, the alarms were sounded and people were out looking for her and cops were called. That call was made by her sister, Wendy. Later, on the 25th, for some reason, James takes it upon himself to not call the police, but call the detective just to let them know that he doesn't know anything about her disappearance. Just wants to randomly call them and be like, hey, you know this missing woman that I was living with? I don't know anything about that or where she is. On July 23rd, Lynn's car was discovered at a Dysart's. Now, I've been to Dysart's. I love Dysart's. It's like a 24-hour truck stop, but there's a restaurant. It's like Denny's, but the food is a little bit better, but they're open 24 hours, but it's for, surprise, surprise, long-haul truckers. So her car is found at the truck station, leading people to believe that she's run off with a trucker. Seriously thinking about having a trucker dance, she's RUNNOFT'd with a trucker dance, I think. Because Dysart's was like a rest stop for long-haul truckers and kind of a place for carpooling, it wasn't weird to see cars parked there for multiple nights or weeks because truckers would meet there and then carpool with each other. Her car being parked there was not alarming. Again, with no evidence of a crime or foul play, no DNA, no proof that she was hurt or dead, James was kind of let off, and it was just kind of accepted that she ran off with a trucker. But don't worry, everybody. James's heart would soon be healed when just 4 short months later, he would meet and fall in love with the love of his life, 18-year-old Brandy Mayo. I just want to remind everyone at this point that James is 45 now. It's a 45-year-old and an 18-year-old. And guess what happens next? I'll give you 2 guesses. He moves in with her and immediately gets her pregnant. And within the year, she gives birth to their first child, a daughter. Their daughter was born in 1997, and in 1998, they get married and move to Bangor, Maine. Cops are still keeping their eye on James. He's still suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Jerry. So when they learn that he's in this new relationship and that he's moved in with her, they find out who Brandy's mother is and actually call her. And it's on the phone where Detective Zamboni learned from Brandy's mother that she had actually been getting phone calls from people that she didn't know, strangers, telling her that her daughter was being abused by her boyfriend, who we now know is James. I'm worried about Brandy because she's barely legal. She's 18, and definitely now worried about the child. The local law enforcement, and I'm going to have to look at this for a second, they call a place called the NCAVC, which is the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. They essentially want James's behavior to be analyzed and assessed to see if he's a threat. They do indeed declare that they believe that he's a threat, he's not safe, and so DHS begins steps to take their daughter away from him. In 1999, the state actually does take their daughter away, and instead of fighting for her, James and Brandy just pick up and move to Texas, where she immediately gives birth to another child. She was pregnant when they moved. She was pregnant with another child when they took her first child away, or she immediately got pregnant with it upon them taking their first child. Learning that they had moved to Texas, Maine law enforcement called Texas law enforcement to let them know what was going on. And because they did that, they were actually able to essentially meet them at the hospital when Brandy was about to give birth, and they immediately took the child then. So as soon as their second baby was born, they took it away from them. She was definitely aware of James's past when they were together. I don't know if she was aware of Susan and the kid diddling, but she was definitely aware of the other stuff. And she would say ridiculous things like, I just need someone to show me. I just need someone to prove to me that he's actually guilty of these actions. Like the 10 years that he spent in prison for murder wasn't, proof enough. But I guess there just wasn't a big enough red flag for her. While they were in Texas, James had a hard time finding a job, so he kind of got like a local job as a handyman, like a self-hire. You come to my house and I'll come fix your stuff. And he did have some long-term clients, and one of them was a woman named Judy. James had been working for Judy, on and off for about 6 months. He had come over to do several little jobs for her. And April 8th of 2000, Judy had called James to see if he could come over to do some tile work and a little bit of painting. So James packed his work van and headed over to her house. After a few hours of working, James had run out of materials, so needed to head off to the store to get more supplies. And when he came back with his supplies and a 6-pack of beer. Now, Judy was a little bit older in age. She was a senior citizen, 65, 70. She wasn't super thrilled to have people drinking while they were working for her. She wanted them to be sober so that they could do a good job. And James knew this. So him bringing the beer with him was kind of like a dickhead move. He got to work, he unloaded his van, he immediately popped the beer open in front of her, and kind of in his smug James, I like to control the situation way, says, oh, you don't mind if I drink this, do you? I imagine very much expecting her to say no, but she didn't say no. She said, yes, I do mind. I prefer you don't drink while you're working. So James went to his truck, put down the beer, and brought back an entire can of whoop-ass and a Coke bottle filled with some sort of mysterious liquid, probably Robitussin. James is out at his van swapping his cans, and June's just sitting down in like a little den room of her house, like a little sitting area, where she sees James coming down the hall, like muttering and swearing under his breath. And swearing is another thing that June doesn't like. So James is coming down the hall, approaching her, and gets so close to her. And remember, she's sitting and he's standing. So we're talking like, at this point, his genitals have to be kind of near her face. So he gets so close to her that June reports to the Bangor Daily News that he's touching her. Like, not with his hands, but with his body, with that groin area. And then he begins screaming and ranting about how he can't work on her house anymore. It's taking too long and he can't do it. And he's got a daughter that he never even met, and they think he killed his wife, and just rambling on and on about the stuff, and June's got no idea what he's talking about. With his groin basically in her face. And it's at that point where she kind of redirects her gaze and like looks up and realizes that he has a gun essentially hanging in front of her face, which could be debatably better than the penis. June at this point tries to stand up, and James shoves her back down into the chair. June reaches for the telephone on the side table. James knocks it out of her hand and disconnects it. After knocking the phone out of June's hand and disconnecting it, he then begins to run around the house, locking all the doors and windows. Does that sound familiar? That sounds a little bit like our friend Ken Pont. While he's running around frantically locking everything up, he's screaming at June, telling her that he needs two things from her: her money and her time. James was planning to skip town and run, and he needed money so he could afford to do it, and time so he could get away. James paced around his own path, circle after unstable circle, ranting about how he'd been married 4 times, he can't see his children, his life is ruined, he doesn't know what to do. And June is in tears, just asking him, begging him just to please just stop and take whatever it is he wants and just leave her alone. Hearing June's plea, like a true psycho, James immediately just pulled himself together, calmly walked over to June and told her to stand up and start walking down the hall to her bedroom. At which point, James grabbed her arm, put the gun up next to her ear, and fired a warning shot. At which point, June went into the bedroom. After locking June in her bedroom, he then runs to his van to get the beer that she requested he didn't drink, which I can only describe as a James Hicks power move, and brought it back into the house, and then demanded the keys to her car and the title to her car and to her house. After he did that, he then threw a pen and a notepad at June and demands that she writes what June describes as a suicide note to her family. When she was done writing the note, James then gave her the bottle of Coke and cough syrup, and with a gun to her head demanded that she drink it. But before he gave it to her, James took a drink himself. Because if there's anything James needs right now, it's a big old sip of Robo-Coke. After June had drinking enough cough syrup to satisfy James, he then left her in the room again and ran down the hall to fill up the bathtub and started checking the doors again. But this time, while he was checking the doors, June heard a bell, like some bells on a doorknob, and that immediately worried her because that bell was on the doorknob of the closet where she kept her guns. And it was at this moment where she just gathered everything inside of her, because remember, she's all drugged up on Robitussin now. She musters everything she has and beelines it to her door, unlocking it. She makes sure that she does the deadbolt last because she knows that this is going to be the loudest lock that she has to unlock. She gets out of her house and somehow stumbles over to her neighbor's house, where the door is thankfully unlocked and she's able to get in. And she just runs around the house until she found the son of the house playing Nintendo, and at that point she just collapses from the effect of the medications. June did make it to the hospital. She spent the next few days in and out of a coma as the massive amounts of cough syrup were leaving her body, but she was able to make a recovery, and James was caught in custody and screwed. James was facing being charged with aggravated assault and robbery, and Texas had a zero tolerance policy for aggravating the elderly at all. So the fact that these crimes were committed against a senior citizen elevated them a lot. Texas does not take kindly to their elder abuse, and I wholeheartedly support it. This elevated conviction or elevated accusation of assault and robbery, coupled with his past, his previous murder, and his alleged involvement with Jerry, he was looking at 15 years to life in prison in Texas. Luck for James, it seems, has finally run out, and he was not going to be able to post bail, which means he's going to have to sit in jail now until his trial, and he was not very keen to do so. James is arrested, he's indicted, he's facing charges of aggravated assault and robbery. His bail was set at $250,000, and it didn't take James very long to realize that he super hated Texas, and he was willing to do anything to get out of Texas. And this is when he begins to hatch a plan with his brother, Stephen. And that's going to do it for today, folks. We're already getting on to being an hour long. So like I said earlier, we're going to cut this into 2 parts. So the next video is going to be the conclusion of James Hicks. But after that, we're going to take a deep dive into history, go back to 1914, and talk about a kind of swept under the rug incident, the coalfield wars of Colorado. So put on your history hats, because we're going to do a little learning next time. But until then, be safe and be kind. Bye.